Barney Hill is lying back in a chair. His eyes are closed. His fists are clenched. And under hypnosis, he starts to scream. They're there. The eyes. Oh God, the eyes. They're in my head. I can't escape them. His voice cracks. He begs for it to stop, but the images keep coming. A craft. Strange figures. A night on a lonely New Hampshire road he can't remember and can't ever forget. This was 1961. Betty and Barney Hill, just a regular couple. He worked for the post office. She was a social worker. They lived in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, with their dog, Delcy. No history of wild claims, no thirst for the spotlight. Just two people driving home from a vacation. But that night, and everything that came after, would go on to become the first widely publicized alien abduction story in American history. And it laid the foundation for every alien encounter that followed. I'm Robert Barber, and tonight we're headed to the White Mountains, where a strange light in the sky turned into a story that changed the UFO conversation forever. This is the story of Betty and Barney Hill in the night America's first alien abduction case was born. This is State of the Unknown. It's the night of September 19th, 1961. Betty and Barney Hill are headed home from a trip through Canada, a much-needed break. They'd driven through Montreal and Niagara Falls, hoping to unwind, to forget the stress of their daily lives. They were still newlyweds, married for less than 2 years. Interracial marriages weren't just rare back then, they were dangerous. Even in the North, even in liberal towns, people stared, whispered, judged. Now, on the long drive home to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, it's just the two of them and their dog Delcy. They take US Route 3, a 2-lane road that winds through the White Mountains, remote and dark at that hour. Trees crowd the shoulders. The sky is moonless. It's sometime after 10:30. Maybe closer to 11. They're tired, but not enough to stop. If they keep going, they'll be home by dawn. Betty watches the stars through the passenger window. She sees one that seems a little off, too bright, too low. It moves. At first, she thinks, maybe it's a satellite or a plane, something explainable. But then it darts upwards, pivots, moves in sharp, angular motions, impossible maneuvers for any known aircraft. She doesn't say anything right away. She just keeps watching, measuring. Finally, she turns to Barney and says, "Do you see that?" He's skeptical, always is, a rational man. Served in the army, works for the post office. Doesn't go in for science fiction or flying saucers. But even he has to admit, it's not behaving like anything he's seen before. They pull off near a roadside stop called the Old Man of the Mountains, a rocky cliff face that from certain angles resembles a profile. Betty grabs her binoculars from the glove box, gets out. Through the lenses, she sees something strange. A disc-shaped object with lights, red, blue, maybe green. It hovers, spins, then shifts position without turning. She hands the binoculars to Barney. Barney steadies them, looks up. What he sees makes his stomach twist. It's not just a light, it's a craft, structured, with windows, and in those windows, figures, silhouettes, moving. He says later they reminded him of military personnel. Tall, lean, uniformed, but not quite right. He can't hear them, but he feels something. He gets the overwhelming sensation that he's being watched. Not just observed, studied. Betty urges him, let's go. But Barney, pulled by something between curiosity and dread, insists they drive a little farther. They head towards Indian Head, another scenic pull-off, and stop again. This time, he gets out of the car. He walks into a nearby field, alone. There it is, hovering just above the trees. Maybe 80 to 100 feet in the air is the object, silent, silver gray, round, like a flattened disc. Porthole windows line the front like a ship's bridge. Red lights pulse along the sides. And in those windows, 8 to 11 beings. Thin, pale, almost gray. Their heads too large for their bodies. Their eyes too big, too black. One steps forward, and that's when it hits him. Barney says he feels a wave of something, like his thoughts are no longer private, that a message enters his mind, not a voice, a command. Stay where you are. Keep looking. He's frozen, terrified, and then instinct just takes over. He runs. He bolts back to the car, shouting, "They're going to capture us!" They slam the doors, peel off down the road. Then the sound. It's not coming from the dashboard, not from the radio. It's coming from the car itself, or maybe from inside them. And then, nothing. Just silence. When they come to, they're 35 miles south, near Ashland. It's nearly dawn. They remember nothing of the drive. No turns, no towns, just missing time. An hour, maybe two, gone. They make it home. Delcy, their dog, is quiet, unusually so. And both Betty and Barney feel wrong. Like something happened. Like something was taken. And that night in the White Mountains was only the beginning. They make it home just after sunrise. The trip should have been over. Just a drive, just a vacation. But something followed them home. Betty's first instinct is to bring the luggage inside, but then she stops. Without quite knowing why, she leaves the bags at the back door. Something feels wrong, like the car or the clothes or the road itself carried something they shouldn't bring inside. She doesn't even let Delcy in right away. The dog, usually hyper, tail wagging, just stands there, shaking. She won't move from Betty's side. And that's when they notice the other things. Barney's shoes, scuffed badly across the tops, as if he'd been dragged, or sprinting across gravel. The strap on his binoculars is broken clean through. He doesn't remember it snapping. Betty's dress is torn, along the hem, the zipper. She doesn't know how or when that happened. And then there's something else, a strange pink powder dusting the fabric. It won't come out, no matter how many times she tries to clean it. She ends up tossing the dress in the closet, but something tells her not to throw it away. And then they check their watches. Both have stopped. Same time. They try winding them. Nothing. They'll never work again. They're exhausted, but sleep doesn't come. Not real sleep. It's like their bodies know they're supposed to rest, but their minds won't let them. And that night, Betty starts to dream. Not just one strange dream, the same dream, over and over again, 5 nights in a row. She's walking in the woods. She sees the craft. She's taken, not violently, but firmly. She tries to scream, Nothing comes out. She's led down a narrow hallway, metal walls, bright lights. There's a room, a table, beings with oversized heads, thin limbs, and black, glassy eyes. She's placed on the table, examined, prodded. They speak, but not with their mouths. She hears them inside her own head. They insert a long needle into her stomach, into her navel, and she screams in pain. But then, one of them makes a motion with his hand in front of her face, and the pain disappears, just like that. She says they seemed fascinated by her teeth. She wore dentures, and the beings didn't understand. They took them out, studied her jaw, and in one dream, she's shown something else. A book. Strange symbols like a manual. She doesn't recognize the language, but she understands the feeling. It's important. One of the beings tells her she can keep it, but later, another one takes it away. They don't want you to remember, he says. She wakes up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, and each time she writes it all down, word for word, sketches the beings, the room, the layout, even the book. Barney doesn't have those dreams, but he's changing too. He starts pacing the house at night, peeking out windows, locking doors, and then checking them again. He avoids eye contact, becomes quiet, withdrawn. And then one night, he tells her. When he closes his eyes, he sees them. The eyes. Huge, staring, watching him from inside his own mind. He can't escape them. They're just there. Something happened that night. Something real. But they don't know what it was. They're left with torn clothes, broken watches, and hours they can't remember. And they're left with silence. And silence, sometimes, is worse than fear. That's when they decide to seek help. And what they find under hypnosis will change everything. By the time fall turns to winter, the hills are unraveling. Betty can't sleep. The dreams haven't stopped. They come every night like clockwork. The table, the lights, the long needles. Barney's not dreaming, but that might be worse. He's tense, on edge, starts checking the locks more than once before bed. At work, he stares off mid-conversation, like he's somewhere else entirely. He's losing weight, waking up in cold sweats, and there's something he hasn't told Betty yet. He's seeing the eyes, not in dreams, but in the dark, every time he closes his own. Large, black, watching him from inside his mind. He tries to brush it off, tells himself it's nothing, but it doesn't go away, and finally, he cracks. He tells Betty. She listens, quiet, and when he finishes, she just says, "We need help." That's how they end up in the office of Dr. Benjamin Simon. He's a psychiatrist in Boston, respected, conservative, not some fringe UFO guy. In fact, when they first come to him, he doesn't even believe in aliens, but he does believe in trauma. Barney tells him about the anxiety, the insomnia, the panic attacks. Betty talks about the dreams, the missing time, the fear that something happened, and they just can't remember it. Dr. Simon suggests hypnotherapy. It's not a memory retrieval technique, he says, not exactly, but it's helped veterans deal with war trauma. Maybe he can help them too. Over the course of several months, he hypnotizes them, separately, different days, different sessions. No way for them to influence each other's memories. And what comes out of those sessions? Barney's voice, calm at first, shifts quickly. He's walking. He sees the craft. It's huge, silent, above the trees. Then he says something's telling him, not speaking, but telling. to walk up the ramp. He doesn't want to, but he does. He describes being taken into a bright room, being told to undress. He doesn't remember being forced, but he can't remember saying yes either. He just obeys. They place a cup-like device over his groin. He doesn't know what it does, but he thinks they took a sperm sample. His voice shakes. He starts to cry, and then he screams. Oh my God, the eyes. They're in my head. I can't get them out. Dr. Simon stops the session, gives him a break, but it happens again and again. Then there's Betty's account. Under hypnosis, she describes being separated from Barney. She's frightened, not of pain, but of being alone. She says the beings are small, maybe 4 feet tall, with large bald heads, grayish skin and dark eyes, no noses, thin slits for mouths. She says they don't speak, but she understands them. The words just arrive in her mind. She's placed on a table, examined. They insert a long needle into her navel, deep. It hurts, but when she cries out, one of them waves a hand in front of her face and the pain stops. She says they seemed confused by her teeth. She wore dentures, and they actually took them out to study how her jaw worked. And then, the map. At one point, Betty says she asked one of the beings, "Where are you from?" And the being, who seemed to be in charge, pulls down something like a screen. On it is a pattern of stars, some connected with solid lines, others with dotted lines. Betty gets the impression the solid lines are trade routes. The dotted ones, exploratory paths. She memorizes the star map, the shapes, the layout. Later, awake, she draws it from memory. Years later, an amateur astronomer compares her drawing to known star systems, and he says it closely resembles Zeta Reticuli, a binary star system 39 light years away. Here's the thing. In 1961, Zeta Reticuli wasn't even well known to astronomers, let alone the public. It wasn't in books, it wasn't in sci-fi, and yet her map matches. Dr. Simon finishes the sessions with more questions than answers. He doesn't believe they were abducted. He never says that. But he does believe they experienced something traumatic, something real to them. And here's the part that sticks. They weren't making it up. They weren't even looking for attention. They were scared. And their stories matched in too many details to ignore. Whatever happened that night in the White Mountains, it stayed with them. Inside their dreams, inside their bodies, and maybe, worst of all, inside their minds. At first, they keep it quiet. Just a few close friends, a minister at their church, 1 or 2 people they trust. Betty's the one who shares more. She writes letters. She wants answers. She contacts UFO organizations, trying to figure out if anyone's seen what they saw. Barney, he pulls back. He's wary. He doesn't like attention. And this, all of it, is starting to eat at him. They're still shaken, still processing, and they never plan to go public. But secrets have a way of slipping out. In 1965, a reporter named John Luttrell gets wind of the story. He works for the Boston Traveler, and somehow he gets his hands on parts of the hypnosis tapes. The next morning, the headline stretches across the front page. Couple abducted by aliens in New Hampshire. And just like that, the world knows. In the hills, they become the most famous abductees in America. Radio stations call. Newspapers run columns. UFO groups invite them to conferences. Producers ask for interviews. Authors want to write books. They're flown out, photographed, questioned, debated. Their faces are now public property. Betty leans into it, not out of vanity, but out of conviction. She says people need to know that it happened and they have the right to tell their truth. Barney, he wants none of it. The spotlight terrifies him. He's already dealing with anxiety, and now he's a national headline. He begins to spiral, physically, emotionally. Ulcers, migraines, sleepless nights. The trauma is catching up with him. And it's not just strangers judging them. It's the people around them, too. Here's something you can't ignore. Betty was white. Barney was black. In 1961, that wasn't just unusual. It was controversial. In some places, it was outright dangerous. Their interracial marriage already made them targets. People stared. People talked. And now, on top of that, they were claiming they'd been abducted by aliens. For many, that was all the excuse they needed to dismiss them, or worse, ridicule them. People called them unstable, attention seekers, delusional. Not because of the story, but because of who they were. Because in the eyes of the public, especially back then, they didn't fit the mold of a credible witness. But here's what makes it so remarkable. They didn't back down. Betty continued to speak. She traveled. She answered questions. She kept records. She kept looking at the stars. Barney tried to move on, but the wounds lingered, and they ran deep. He died young, just 8 years after the incident, at age 46. Betty lived into her 80s, and through all the years, all the questions, all the interviews, she never changed her story, not once. So what do we make of that? A couple who never asked for the spotlight became the blueprint. Not for fame, not for fortune, but for something stranger. Because after Betty and Barney Hill, alien abductions would never be the same. If you've ever heard a story about aliens, you've heard echoes of the Hills. Missing time, silent craft, black unblinking eyes, medical experiments, messages sent through thoughts. Before Betty and Barney Hill, none of that was standard. There were no gray aliens, no cultural template for what an abduction looked like. They didn't borrow it, they built it. And that's what makes this case so unsettling. Because if they made it up, they didn't just tell a story. They predicted the entire shape of alien lore decades before it became mainstream. Think about it. It wasn't until the late 70s and 80s that pop culture started to flood with those tropes. The archetypes, the eyes, the lights, movies like Close Encounters, stories of missing time, cold tables, telepathy. But the Hills? They were talking about all of that in 1961. No guidebooks, no internet, no sci-fi conventions, just memory, or trauma, or something else. Over the years, Betty stayed vocal. She claimed to see UFOs again, not once, but several times. Some said she was chasing the high, that after the attention, she couldn't let it go. Others believed she'd simply become more aware, that once you see something, you can't unsee it. Skeptics were never far behind. Some pointed to Betty's dreams. They argued her abduction memories came later, after the dreams. And then maybe, under hypnosis, her mind filled in the blanks using those images. Others said Barney was under enormous stress. That being a black man in a deeply segregated America, married to a white woman, brought pressure no one could see. And maybe that pressure cracked something open. But if that's all it was, stress and dreams and fear, then how do you explain the tapes? When you listen to those hypnosis sessions, really listen, you hear something raw. Barney's voice breaks. He screams. He pleads. Not like someone putting on a show, like someone reliving something. The eyes. I can't get away from the eyes. There's a kind of terror that can't be faked. Not for a therapist, not for a recorder, and not across decades. And then there's the star map. Remember what Betty described? A chart. Stars connected by lines, trade routes, exploration routes. She drew it. And years later, an amateur astronomer looked at that sketch and saw a near-perfect match to Zeta Reticuli, a binary star system 39 light-years away. The dots, the layout, the proportions. And here's the strange part. Back in 1961, Zeta Reticuli wasn't on any common star charts. It wasn't the kind of thing you just know. Not unless you were an astronomer. Not unless someone showed it to you. So how does she draw it? Coincidence? Or contact? That's the riddle at the center of it all. Did Betty and Barney Hill accidentally dream up the future of UFO culture? Or did the future shape itself around the truth they told? Because once their story got out, nothing in the sky ever looked the same again. Okay, let me step out of the story for a minute. Not as your narrator, but as a person who's sat with this case longer than I probably should have. I've read the transcripts. I've listened to the hypnosis tapes. And I'll be honest with you, this one kind of gets to me. It's not just the craft or the missing time or the map. It's Barney's voice. The way it breaks when he talks about the eyes. That raw, shaking fear. That's not the sound of someone pretending. That's someone falling apart in real time. And I can't shake that. Even as I record that part, I get chills. I don't think they made it up. They didn't want fame. They weren't chasing cameras. They weren't pushing a book deal or trying to start a movement. In fact, Barney hated the spotlight. It made him sick, literally. And yet, he still sat down and told that story, over and over again, even when it hurt. So no, I don't believe this was some long con or fantasy. But do I believe every detail? That they were taken aboard a ship, that Betty saw a manual and a star map, that one of them offered her a book, then took it away? I'm not sure. I think maybe some of what they remembered under hypnosis came from the dreams. Maybe some of it was reconstructed or reshaped, the way memory does sometimes. But here's what does stick with me. They weren't working from a script. There was no playbook for what an abduction was supposed to be. And yet somehow, they described the very thing that would become the blueprint for the next 60 years. The lights, the loss of control, the beings, the fear. They were the first. So let me ask you something. If this happened to you, would you tell anyone? Would you risk your job, your reputation, your sanity, just to say something took us? I think that kind of confession only comes from one of two places: an incredible lie or an incredible truth. And the more I sit with this one, the more I think it's the latter. This has been State of the Unknown. The story of Betty and Barney Hill lingers not because it offers answers, but because it leaves us with questions. Were they really taken aboard a craft that night in 1961? Or were their minds just trying to make sense of something stranger? Stress, fear, or a shared moment beyond explanation? What we do know is this: their account became the blueprint for everything that came after. Missing time, hypnosis, the beings with black, unblinking eyes. It all begins here. And that's why their story still unsettles me. Because even if you don't believe in abductions, you can't deny what it meant to them, or how deeply it shaped the way that we talk about what might be out there. Betty and Barney Hill stood by their truth until the end of their lives. And through it all, Their dog Delcy was right there with them, trembling in the back seat, sensing what they could not explain. A reminder that whatever happened that night, it was real enough to shake them all. If you've been enjoying State of the Unknown, follow, rate, and leave a quick review. It helps more than you know. And if you know someone who loves paranormal stories, haunted history, or legends that shouldn't exist, share the show with them. Because the Hills never forgot that night on Route 3. And if their story is true, then somewhere out there, in the dark, above the trees, the eyes are still watching.